And so, long story short, through some amazing, thank you, through some amazing doors opening, I found myself running for office with 60 days to go to the election. I was elected and served my first 2 years. The thing about it is, as soon as I got there, my personality, remember, I had nothing to do with politics at all. I saw during COVID that other states were doing some really awesome freedom things, and Missouri wasn't. I noticed that our governor was not a champion and an advocate, and he certainly wasn't intervening in St. Louis County, where our Department of Health was essentially authoritarian, telling churches to close, but liquor stores could stay open.
Yeah.
Strip clubs can be open,
Yes.
but churches can't, right? Mom and pop shops can't be open, but Walmart can,
Yep.
right? These are things that are completely anti-freedom and anti-American. So I wondered, why in the world is our legislature not doing anything? Why is our governor not intervening, right? Why isn't he protecting our interests? Well, there's a reason for that. There's a very uncomfortable reason for that, and that's exactly what I found. So I entered the legislature and I saw, okay, why are these pieces of legislation? For example, if you know anything about our Republican Party platform here in Missouri, we've got some priorities. The top priority we have had for 8 years is initiative petition reform.
Yes.
And that fails every single year for 8 years. Why is that? Republican leadership, that's why.
Yep.
This is what I want to get across today, and I'll tell you exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. Is that there is a very specific and intentional reason that conservative legislation and our Republican platform priorities don't get passed in the state of Missouri. And yet, in places like Tennessee and Arkansas and Oklahoma, they do, year after year after year. We don't have a problem with Democrats in this state, guys. We have a problem with Republicans.
Yes.
We have a problem with Republican leadership. And so, here's the real deal. There's the bigger picture, and then there's the smaller picture. And I'll explain why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is an unconventional run for Speaker of the House. Remember, I only got to the legislature 2 years ago, and immediately started seeing things like why Republicans pass bills that actually don't do anything. They look like they do something. They may even have a title that they're doing something. A tax reduction that doesn't reduce any taxes. We do a lot of that so that it looks like we're doing something. And leadership wants it that way. And there's a very specific way how we choose our leadership, both in the House and the Senate and everywhere else. And so it's not only John Patterson who's running and expected to be the next Speaker of the House and his record, right? It's the system that gave us John Patterson. And it will be the system that gives us the next leadership and the next leadership for years to come, okay? So how did we get here? Just a little representative, been there for 2 years, immediately started seeing the problems that most of us in this room know we have, saw initiative petition reform fail, knew that it had failed for years, so we formed the Missouri Freedom Caucus to try to get that across the line. And yet, so how did we get here? Well, John Patterson was selected to be the next Speaker of the House over a year ago, in April of 23. You would ask, why do we select the Speaker of the House so long ago, right? When all the other leadership positions in the House are selected on November 6th, the day after the election. That's how we usually do it. We vote for all the leadership positions in the House on November 6th, the day after the election, but the Speaker, the most powerful position, is elected a long time ago. And the reason for that is we exclude the freshman class that just got elected in November 5th.
Yep.
We don't give them a voice. Why don't we give them a voice? We don't give them a voice because they just got done knocking on thousands of doors, telling people what they're going to do. Truth, justice, and the American way, and I'm going to represent you. And then they're expected to go in and elect John Patterson to be the Speaker of the House. A person that voted against the SAFE Act, which prohibits transgender surgeries and therapies on children.
Yep.
Votes against an initiative petition twice, the #1 Republican Party platform in our state. Blocks Second Amendment legislation, and more. And so it's hard for these new reps to be like, I'm going to go support this person. This person doesn't reflect our values. This person doesn't reflect my values or my constituents' values. How can I support this person? Well, 2 years ago, when I became a representative, they told me I didn't have a choice. Remember, I was a freshman, so I didn't get a say in who the Speaker of the House, Dean Blocker, was going to be. And yet, remember how important this is. That Speaker of the House, because the individual members have given their power to the Speaker through a series of rules changes. Rules are like the laws of the House, how legislation gets passed. Every 2 years, we adopt new rules. And with each adoption over the last 20-something years, we have given the Speaker of the House more power. He is now all-powerful. He can do whatever he wants, and he can tell you to be quiet, and people be quiet. He can tell you to sit down, and people sit down. Because if you don't go along with the group, guess what happens? Your bills don't go anywhere. You don't get a nice office. You don't get a committee spot. You don't get a chairmanship, right? Okay, and so on and so on. Because he's got all that power. The secret to changing all of this, because this is kind of a dark conversation we have to have, is it's not non-fixable. We can fix it. We can change the rules and re-empower the people. Send the power back to the people by empowering the individual members again. And I'll get into that. So why would we select John Patterson in April of last year? Why would we do that? If we knew that he was more moderate or liberal, that he was opposed to so many of our priorities, why would we do that? Why would the Republicans do that?
Good at raising money.
They're not Republicans.
Well, so somebody just suggested he raised a lot of money,
Oh.
right? Because that is the excuse that they give
Where's
you.
he from?
He's from Kansas City.
Okay.
Lee Summit.
Lee Summit, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
somebody said he raises a lot of money. How does he raise money? Do you think he's like super effective at going out and knocking on doors and getting people to give us money? That's not how it works. Yeah, that's right. It's special interest money. It's PAC money. And by the way, this is called the DC model because this is how they do it in Washington, DC.
Exactly.
And this is how we get liberal, moderate leadership in Washington, D.C. that is no different than a Democrat. Republicans and Democrats. This just happened in the U.S. Senate, right? With John Cornyn and John Thune, for heaven's sakes. 35% ratings, guys. They vote 2/3 of the time with Democrats, just like John Patterson does.
Yeah.
So what happens is, remember, we have term limits, 8 years. Special interest through the House Republican Campaign Committee. We'll get into that a little bit too. They see who's going to be a person that we can work with, right? And they like moderate people because liberal special interests don't want conservative bills that may get rid of personal property tax or things like that to actually pass in Missouri, right? Because they want to keep making money. So they filter and funnel money to the person of their choice. In this case, John Patterson. And then he turns around and he donates that money to the House Republican Campaign Committee. And whoever gives the most money to HRCC becomes the floor leader, and that person becomes the Speaker of the House. And the excuse they give, the story they sell to all the representatives is this. This person is doing the most to raise the most money to get all of you elected. That's the story. And they sell that story very heavily. It's the Democrats, guys, it's the Democrats. We got to get everybody elected so we can have a supermajority and we can have all the power. I'll ask you this. What's the point of having all the power if we don't pass the Republican priorities? So I don't care how much money that you raise for the party because I don't serve the party. I serve the people. The representatives are supposed to serve you, not the party establishment that allows them to go up to Jefferson City and put representative on their door. It's not that cool, and just because you can have representative behind your name, but not actually pass what the people want, there's no point for us to be there. Right?
Yeah.
Amen.
So you'd say, okay, so that's how the system gets a lot of money to John Patterson, who then gives a lot to HRCC, and then you can look at the MEC reports, and that's who becomes leadership, okay? That's how it works. Money flows through maybe a small handful of people that will be considered for leadership. Whoever gives the most becomes leadership. That's how we got John Patterson running to be Speaker of the House. And there was not a strong alternative. Why in the world, where was me? Where was the version of me before I got here? Because John was already the guy, right? Why didn't anybody? Because it's so hard to run against a system like this. It's almost impossible. And what do they tell you? This is political suicide. Your career's over. Who cares?
Right.
Right? They're going to take your office away. They're going to give you a bad parking spot. Who cares? Right? None of those things are important. Serving you is what is important, and passing the Republican Party platform priorities is what is important, and it's what we're supposed to remember. Is what we're supposed to be doing in Jefferson City. Okay, now, so we give the informal nomination in a private caucus vote to John Patterson, and the conservatives didn't want to do that. Didn't have another alternative, right? He was basically the only guy. But we do. So this is what the conversations we had. At that time, as the floor leader, remember, he was already the floor leader, he had blocked any priority legislation. Here's what I mean by that. He has the power as the floor leader to keep the bills from coming to the floor for a vote. And so even though he voted against the SAFE Act, which is incredible to me, I don't see how as a Republican you can vote against the SAFE Act, but he didn't block it. And he was the last person to vote no. He was the last person. He held out his vote until the end. He voted no. Okay. So that's his own personal thing. You'd have to talk to him about why he feels that way. But he didn't block that legislation. And that was the strongest selling point for allowing him then to get the nomination to become the speaker.
Because he didn't block.
Because he didn't block it, right? Even though he voted against it, but he didn't block it. And you'll hear representatives say this. Well, he didn't block the legislation. Okay, fine, right? But it's a moral issue for me, right? It's a character vote, showing something's wrong. Okay, so I was like, okay, hopefully, right? That's exactly right. Fast forward, we see. First of all, obviously, initiative petition reform fails, and I'll tell that story if we have time. And I'll give you some time for questions and answers too. So, initiative petition reform fails, but that's a whole nother little section, and you'll enjoy that story too. We see Amendment 3 coming. We could easily see it, and I will tell you right here and now, Amendment 3 passed in our state by 48,000 votes, and we could have stopped it.
Yep.
100%. Bar none, Republican government could have stopped it. 100% if they wanted to stop it, they could have. And I can prove it to you. We had two strategies that we knew would work and now have been proven by the data, the real evidence, both would have worked. Number one, of course, everybody knows it, initiative petition reform with concurrent majority. If that bill would have passed, the evidence shows 5 out of 8 congressional districts would not have voted for Amendment 3. We wouldn't have Amendment 3.
And we wouldn't have recreational marijuana.
That's also true. Number 2, HJR, House Joint Resolution 131. That's what I filed, which would have put a competing question on the ballot. So you would have Amendment 3, the pro-abortion, pro-death, and then you'd have Amendment 4, which would give a pro-life option to enshrine our current restrictions into our Constitution. If Amendment 4 would have got one more vote than Amendment 3, Amendment 3 doesn't exist. And Amendment 4, our polling showed that it would have passed with 78%. It wasn't even close. So I went to John Patterson, and I said, John, this is our idea. Our idea is HJR 131, and naively, remember now, I'm going to take my own hit on this, I was naive because John hadn't blocked legislation yet. And so I told him this was our strategy and that we had a path forward in the Senate. We were working with senators who told me that we have a path to get this passed in the Senate, but we got to get it on the floor and passed in the House. And I told John that. And maybe I shouldn't have, obviously, but he told me, I can't support that. And I said, okay, well, we're not going to have that debate right now, why you as a Republican should be pro-life and support this, but okay, that's your own personal choice. Just don't block it. Just don't block the legislation, right? Give us a chance, even if you don't think it's going to pass. Give us a chance. Because, John, I have to do the very most that I can do to stop this from happening. We cannot become the most pro-abortion state in the whole country. And that's exactly what has happened, guys. Under a supermajority of Republicans with all statewide elected offices. Think about that.
It's embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. It's a shame. It's shameful. And it could have been prevented. So he said, I can't support it. And I said, okay, I'm going to try anyway, right? So I went and started getting signatures. This is a tactic that the House uses to get our colleagues' signatures on a piece of paper, essentially like a petition, to go to the floor leader and tell them this is what we want to do as a priority, bring it up. And so I started getting signatures, and I was getting help. Other people were getting signatures with me. And he went to that person, Bishop Davidson's his name, and said, stop helping getting signatures for him. And I remember where it was when Bishop Davidson told me, John has told me to stop getting signatures, and I'm going to do it. I'm not going to get any more signatures. He's told me, remember, he's going to be the speaker. He has the power now, remember? He's already got the nomination. He's all powerful. And if you go against him, what's going to happen to you, right? Yeah, so Bishop says, okay, he complied. He stopped getting signatures. And then another member, Brian Seitz, you may know him, he wanted to speak about this issue in caucus. And so he went to John and he said, this is our number one issue. I want to talk about this in caucus and have a discussion because Republicans really care about this. We want to stop this from happening in Missouri. And he told Brian, you will not even speak about this in caucus. And Brian complied. Brian called me and said, I won't speak about this in caucus. And I said, Brian, are you going to let him tell you to be quiet and shut up and sit down? And he said, I have to. Because Brian knew that if he did speak and he disobeyed, then his bills for his district wouldn't go anywhere.
Blackmail.
And that's what really happened. I don't like having to have these conversations, but I think that the truth is the most important thing, and so I'm going to tell it to you. I'm going to tell it to you. You're welcome. So that's what happened. HJR 131 failed, guys. It didn't get to the floor. It didn't get a vote on it. And you know what happened, of course, right? Right before the vote on Amendment 3, John said that he didn't think an abortion ban was working for Missouri, but he didn't support Amendment 3. He just didn't think a full ban was what was working for Missouri. Personally, I think a ban works great for the unborn because they're not being killed. That's my own personal opinion. It was with those comments where he talks about we're going to respect the will of the voters that I was like, no more. Because if we're going to have an all-powerful speaker and he's not showing a willingness to tackle Amendment 3, then I knew I had to do something extreme, which is what I'm doing, by the way. Very unconventional by putting my name into the hat to be voted on as speaker in January when the speaker has already got the nomination. It is a really big deal, but it has, I believe, changed the conversation in the state because what I'm doing is what most of the people want. And yet, most of their representatives are not listening to their people.
Right.
Also identifying probably the number one problem we have in this state with our government is that your government doesn't listen to you.
Right.
And we must make them listen again. I'm going to share a real quick story with you why Amendment 3 is so important to me, and maybe you've heard it already. But it kind of illustrates specifically why I'm doing and why I'm so motivated, particularly about this issue. But also, I want you to know, I've told my colleagues this. Everything I've shared with you. I mean everything. I have told them this. I've called them. Some of them answer, some of them don't. And I went to Winter Caucus, our big Republican meeting, and told this entire thing to them. Some listened, some didn't, unfortunately. And here's why. When I was a little boy, 5 years old, my mother worked in an abortion clinic. She actually helped perform abortions. She was a medical student and a medical assistant in college, and she assisted physicians in performing abortions at the largest abortion mill in the entire Midwest at the time. And she saw a little baby boy born with his arms and legs ripped off from the abortion, and it took 55 minutes for him to die. And it was abortions like that, because remember, abortion isn't policy, it's people. And I know we're eating lunch and this is a hard conversation to have, but this is what kind of motivated me to do what I'm doing, because it's so important. This issue is the moral issue of our time. It really is.
It is.
It's like slavery in the 1860s.
Yes.
We have to take a gut check moment of where we're going to be in a state, because right now, we're the most pro-abortion state in the whole country. And so we have a brief moment of opportunity to do something about it. Doing abortions like that caused my mom to go home one night and take my dad's off-duty service revolver, because he was a policeman, and put it to her head and pull the trigger. And miraculously, the gun didn't go off. And she was saved that night by Christ. gave her life completely over to the Lord and completely changed. She started pregnancy resource centers to give women an opportunity and the ability not to have an abortion. And if you remember, like 35 years ago, having a baby out of wedlock was a kind of a big deal. And a lot of families would like, if you're not going to have an abortion, you're getting kicked out of the family. And so our family would take these girls in. And one of 5 kids, but I was the only boy, so I was the only one that had a little bedroom. So I was the one that gave up my bedroom, right, for these girls. And I remember one specifically, Jenny. She came to live with us through the Christmas holidays, just like we are right now. And she was getting kicked out of her house, so we gave her a place to live. And when she had the baby and brought the baby home, it's Christmas, and she's looking at the baby, and she's looking at the face of the baby, and it's not just the joy of motherhood. If you have kids, you understand the joy of fatherhood and the joy of motherhood. It was relief. The look on her face when she would look at that little baby was relief. A feeling that I can't understand, but she can, because she didn't have an abortion. She chose to keep that little baby. And every time she would look at that little baby, she would think to herself, I almost went through with it. That, guys, is why I feel like this issue is so important and why I've done something so extreme as putting my name in the hat in order to try to do something and tackle this issue, but not just this issue. This issue is just one of so many that we should be addressing as Republicans in this state, because it is what the people have identified as the #1 priorities. Protecting the unborn, initiative petition reform, and protecting our Constitution, and so many others. And yet your Republican leadership won't listen to you, refuses to listen to you. And we have to change that. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. With that, I'll take some of your questions.
So I appreciate very much your Christian faith. It seems like many representatives silo their faith and their politics when they get up to Jeff City. They run on their faith, and then they get up to Jeff City, and then they do things like support John Patterson and all kinds of other things. How do you avoid that?
Yeah.
How did you avoid that?
That's a great question. What they do is they compromise themselves very incrementally. It doesn't happen overnight, it takes a long time. And they compromise themselves by justifying and rationalizing behavior like supporting John Patterson for speaker, even though they've seen what he's done. I told them, I had this conversation with them. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not making this up. There are people in this room, in the caucus room, sitting right here that can corroborate my story, right? Yeah. And so what the answer to your question is, you have to decide right away at the very beginning of what you're going to be. Are you going to take a stand or are you going to compromise? And what many, I would say the vast majority of them do, is they're faced with an unbelievably powerful system. A system that selects leadership, a system that says, for example, when I went down to my first caucus meeting 2 years ago, they gave me an envelope. In the envelope was a card on it, and what was on the card? A dollar amount, $20,000 was mine. Different amounts for all the different Republicans. I said, what is this? Remember, I wasn't in politics, so I don't know any of this, right? Like, what the heck is this? Like, this is how much you have to donate to the House Republican Campaign Committee. And I said, well, what if I don't donate this money? You know, because all these people gave me money to run and be successful in office because campaigns are expensive, and now I'm supposed to give that money to you? Is there transparency? Is there accountability? Do I get a choice in where this money goes or who this supports? No, you don't. And if you don't give this money, you won't get a powerful committee or position or a powerful chairmanship, and you certainly won't be considered for leadership one day. I said, okay, I'm not okay with that, because from my background in law enforcement, you gotta have accountability with money. You gotta be able to say, I am accountable to my constituents who gave me the money. Because I didn't know at the time that they were looking for somebody that would go along with the system that they could funnel huge amounts of special interest money to, that I could give it to HRCC in exchange to be considered for a powerful committee, chairmanship, or leadership, because that's how it works. And so immediately, you got to start trying. So that's the answer to your question. The very first thing is, no, I'm not going to go along with that system. But so many of them do, and they're not bad people, by the way. It's not like I'm the only one. There's a lot of good people up there, but a lot of them have compromised because they say, if we can't beat the system, so we have to get into the system and change it from within. We have to go along with the system, and then once we get the power, then we'll change it. Guess what? That never happens. Because by the time they actually get the power, what has happened in order for them to get the power? And now they are the system. And now your 8 years is over and you're gone. And the whole cycle repeats itself infinitum forever. That is what really happens. Yes, sir?
Justin, you and I have spoken on the phone. And first of all, everybody in here, I know, is against abortion. You and I spoke, and what I really needed to know to try to get more people on board was the path, the exact path to success for you to become the chairman. And we spoke about that, and there's so many people, representatives and constituents alike, that are saying that you don't have a snowball's chance and you know where of getting there. You and I spoke, and you said there was, I believe, 2 different paths that could happen. And I think a lot of the rhetoric is people talking about, oh, well, if you don't vote for John, or if you don't vote for Justin, then you're a rhino. All that needs to be thrown out the window because it's not winning over anybody. What needs to happen is we need to know the path to success, how we can help you get that path to success, and eliminate all the negative rhetoric and say this is what needs to happen.
Yep. Great
for
point.
the reasons you've just given.
Yep.
Can you
Path to
restate
success.
that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So what is the path to victory? That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
What is the path to victory? And when we're talking to our representatives, we must be respectful. So what has happened is a lot of people have heard what I'm doing, and then they hear about their representatives not supporting me, and they get angry. And they do. Folks get angry because they're like, why in the world? They look at John Patterson's record and they're like, oh my gosh, why in the world would we ever make this person the most powerful speaker, right? The most powerful person in the House with all the control. And that's a fair question, obviously. But when we get angry like that, and then some people call their representatives and they call them names and they call them a rhino or whatever, it actually doesn't help them move on the needle, right? And have you ever heard of attract more flies with honey than vinegar, right? And here's the reason why. In that pressure cooker, it is difficult because you formed these relationships, you're trying to do the right thing, maybe it's different than what we would do, but you're trying genuinely, and now you feel like you're stuck. You feel like, most of these representatives feel like, if I support Justin Sparks, then I'm going to burn down any hopes and dreams that I have of doing anything, my own political career. Now, you might say, who cares?
It's not just about the
right?
career.
But it's not just about your career. But yeah, it's not just about their own career. It's also, they want to do something for their own district. They want to pass legislation for their own district, and they're afraid that that won't happen. It probably won't happen anyway. But that's what I kind of tell them is, if it's any conservative legislation, it's probably not going to happen anyway. But that's their concern, and it is a real concern. And that's where they're torn. They're torn with, man, if, like so many of them guys said, talk to me, if you have a path to victory, I'm with you and I'm voting for you. And the vast majority of them are already ideologically completely aligned with where I am, right? They're right there. They want to vote with me. They want to have good, conservative, strong leadership to do the Republican platform priorities. They just don't think that there's a chance to win. And that's why they're like, oh, I'm not going to support him because he can't win. That's what I heard from, that's what I've heard from tons of people. Here's what I would say to that. Maybe it is David versus Goliath. That's possible. Yeah, I would describe it that way too. And I would say this. The greatest weapon our enemy has against us is convincing us not to fight back in the first place. You can't win if you don't run.
Exactly.
And nobody ever runs because of exactly this situation. Yeah, talking about the specific path, there's a couple different ones. Right now, do I have enough Republican support to get to that 82 number? No. I have a small core of never going to back down believers that are with me no matter what. This would be your remnant, right? We have a much larger group that will definitely vote with me if it looks like I could win, okay? But they're worried that there isn't a path forward. Okay, that's fair. But also, remember what I referenced earlier. I referenced changing the rules, didn't I?
You did.
This is something I've talked about for 2 years. All the way back when I first came into the House, we were fighting the rules then, and we will continue to fight the rules. What does that mean? The rules are everything, but they have to come from a Speaker of the House that will voluntarily champion and advocate a rules change that will decentralize his own power and send it back to the individual members. This is why this is important, and my opposition is probably more afraid of changing the rules than they are of me. And here's the reason why. The rules is how they keep all the conservative legislation from coming forward. They blame the Democrats. We just can't have Democrat bills. But they're actually suppressing conservative legislation. And they've done this for years. Okay. So why does this matter with the Speaker race? Because Democrats want the rules changes too. Why? Democrats only have 52 members in the House. We have 111. None of their bills are ever going to pass because it would take all the Republicans voting for the Democrat bills. So the Democrats, however, they don't get any bills referred. They have no voice, they have no power. Remember how we talked about this earlier? And with the rules changes, sending the power back to the people, those Democrats would actually get their bills referred because all of the bills, all of your number one priority bills as representatives would be guaranteed referral to the committee of your choice. So everyone gets a priority bill. So if it's Brian Seitz from Taney County, he gets his bill referred to committee guaranteed. Guaranteed referral. And he can compel the chairmanships for a vote and out of committee. And by the way, if it's a good bill, guess who's going to vote for it? Republicans. Republicans are going to vote for those bills, and they're going to actually get to the floor and actually have a chance for passage. That's a really big deal.
Does that present an unworkable workload situation for the?
Great question. No. That's one of the things that the narrative is. That would just be way too many bills. Do you know what we handle thousands of bills right now? There's only 153 members.
153 bills, right?
It's just 153 bills. Trust me, we spend so much time doing absolutely nothing up there, and we're all just asking, like, why aren't we doing anything? Well, because there's only a handful of bills that they want to get to the floor in the first place. And it's like, oh, another big insurance bill. Oh, another big pharma bill, right? It's always these huge, gigantic special interest bill. Oh, this is a good one for Pfizer, of course. We're going to go talk about this for 4 hours, you know? Not necessary. To your point, we can handle all the bills and more. And by the way, it's only your priority bill, so it's 153 bills.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and we have till May to get it done. And they go to the floor in order. We tackle them one by one. If they're good, they pass. And if they don't, they won't. We have 111, they have 52. Democrat bills probably will never even get out of committee, let's be honest. They're going to die in committee before they even get to the House. So we're not even going to vote for them. But at least they get to say, this is my priority bill from my constituents or the district that I came from, St. Louis City, whatever it is, right? And that's where it goes. And by the way, they do that in other states. They do that in Ohio. Lots of other states do it this way. Why don't we, though? Why don't we? And you know what? The biggest pushback is you can't give those 50 Democrats any type of anything, right? And I'm like, they have 52 versus 111. It's not even close. They're using it actually to suppress awesome conservative legislation that you want done, but never even makes it to committee. Here's a great illustration of that. Here's an example. I can't take money from foreign interest in my campaign. And we would all agree in this room that that's a good thing, right?
Yes.
But why can those foreign interests from Eastern Europe spend $30 million convincing women that it's all Amendment 3 is about ectopic pregnancies and contraception? Why is that legal? Do you know why? Because that bill never gets to go to committee and gets voted and made to law. That's why.
Yeah.
See, that bill should be done in the first week. You can't meddle in our constitutional process if you're outside our country. Duh. Right?
Right.
So to your path, if the Democrats, they have 52 members, if they want to change the rules, they vote for me, I get 30 Republicans, that's 82. That's a victory right there. And it won't be just 30 Republicans, by the way. It would be way more than that. because Republicans want to vote for these rules changes. But yeah, that's...
We spoke about how that could happen. We spoke about a roll call vote versus
Yep.
anonymous vote.
Yeah, that's true.
Tell them what you said to me about that.
So this is because, again, the rules have been changed so many times. We now allow a vote by acclamation, which is exactly what they're going to try to do. A vote of acclamation occurs when the Democrat will rise, some Democrat will rise to nominate a Democrat for Speaker of the House. Then that Democrat will get up and they will talk all about how horrible Republicans are, and then they will refuse the nomination and sit down and support the Republican. And then a motion for a vote of acclamation will be made, which is basically there's no one else opposing the John Patterson, and so it's just basically a formality and John Patterson becomes the Speaker. Here's the difference. If the Democrats don't do that, or if they stay out of it, then it possibly opens it up for a public vote for anybody to be nominated and voted, including myself. That's what could happen. We just don't know. They don't know, and we don't know. But it will be public. It will be public. It will be on the floor. It will not be a secret vote.
But it won't be roll call, then it'll just be an acclamation.
So if it's a vote of acclamation, like let's say they just decide to ignore anybody that rises up to nominate me, then it will just be a vote of acclamation with no roll call vote. Exactly, yeah.
Do you have somebody that's going to rise up to nominate you?
Yes.
Okay, and that will go to a vote? And how will
If
that
they
vote-
recognize that person, they could attempt to just ignore that person on the floor.
Do you have 2 or 3 backup people?
Yes,
Okay, okay.
yes. Now, here's another alternative as
How will
well.
that vote happen, though? You didn't go to that.
So how that vote happens
You
is,
get nominated and
Yes.
they accept. How will that vote occur?
if they recognize the person that nominates me, I will rise, I will give a speech, and then there will be a roll call vote.
A roll call vote.
It will be a roll call vote.
Okay.
At that time, it would be, if they recognize that process, yes.
And so that's where the fear factor comes in.
And that's where all of your conservatives, they want to avoid that.
Can they not do it on an anonymous vote?
No, we can't do a secret vote at
Can't
that
do a
point.
secret
No, no secret ballot. Yeah. That would have been a year ago, in April of '23 when we were originally. Yes, sir.
What would stop them from recognizing the person that would nominate you?
Oh, they do that all the time.
Yeah.
They do that all the time. They just act like you don't exist. It's great. Anyway, there is an alternative as well.
Can't you have so many people rise? Can't you have so many people rise in your favor and then they have to recognize it?
That's interesting. I need to check on that with the rules to see if like sometimes there's a 5-member standing rule, you know,
I believe so.
yeah, that's possible. And we do have more than 5. Yes.
Who's in charge of that part, since you guys are all newly inaugurated or whatever?
So the person on the dais, running the dais, is the Secretary of State.
The old one or
The old Secretary
Oh,
of State, not
crap.
the new one. Right.
Sorry, I said
Because the new one, the new one,
Smash our people in here.
the new one doesn't get elected until January 13th. So what typically happens, I believe in the past, even though I wasn't there, we've tried to look at recordings and things. It looks like the Secretary of State will simply give up his duties to the caucus chair, who we elected as Benny Cook, who would then run the proceedings that day. And he can recognize who he wants. So the answer to your question is we're not exactly sure. Is it a long shot? Yes. Is it a possibility? Yes. It's a long shot, but it definitely could happen. Now, here's the alternative as well. And this has been a topic that I want to actually bring it into the public with you. Many of my colleagues have said to me, in person, many, probably most, have said, Justin, could you possibly get guarantees from John Patterson? Because at our winter caucus meeting, John Patterson said his new priorities, which is wonderful, is tackling Amendment 3, initiative petition reform, and our Second Amendment. Those are his top 3 priorities.
Do you believe him?
Now, here's the thing, right? Trust but verify.
Yes.
And so many of my colleagues have said, Justin, if those guarantees occur, would you unite under the party under these conditions? That if he doesn't come through, then we make a motion to vacate the speakership, and then you simply pause your run, you suspend your run, and then we vote to vacate like they did to Kevin McCarthy. Many of them have said, I will sign the paper with you to do that. If he doesn't do what he's going to do. And so that's what that's a conversation that we have to have, right?
By when? By May
Yeah.
5th?
Spring break. It has to be done, it pretty much has to be, yeah, May 5th, right. It has to be done by spring break because if the legislation doesn't get passed and sent over to the Senate by spring break, it typically doesn't become law. That's the reality of the deal. And so when we're saying like, do you trust John? Well, a lot of my colleagues trust John because they say he hasn't ever gone back on his word to them. I've had a different experience.
Yeah.
Clearly, right? So, it's like, do I want to look at the bigger picture and unite the Republican Party under ideals and policy? Principles, not personality.
Right.
Principles, not people in power. Right?
The platform.
It's got to be platform and principles and policies. And that's the conversation that, guys, believe it or not, groups like you are all over the state. I mean all over the state, and I am going all over the state, and everybody says the exact same thing. There is an awakening happening.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievable thing to see, which is we want the Republican Party platform passed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's it. Real simple.
Delegate, we tried, didn't we?
That was a frustrating day.
I know it was.
Well, the guy that stopped is now in the same suite as John Patterson.
Oh.
Yeah, and already he's announcing his chairmanship today. Some committee he's already.
That's what we're faced with. Yes.
So I've not been able to find a social media presence for John Patterson, and when the reps here have expressed angst about, supporting you publicly, they're like, well, no, John's promised this, he's promised that. Why won't he go public with that? Why won't John Patterson put these things in writing and sign his name to it? Obviously,
agree.
you can't answer that.
I would love to see that.
Yeah.
I honestly would love to see that. I mean, like, look, can trust but verify? You know what I mean? I just don't. I'm not there to trust somebody and just be like, okay, sure. Because remember, I told you I'd tell you how initiative petition failed because of what happened last year with initiative petition reform. Here's how it really went down. Do you know how it failed?
No.
Do you want to know how it failed?
It passed the House.
It passed the House. Here's how it passed the House.
Okay,
Yes.
let's make that clear.
Right.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But he held it for 2 months.
But it passed in the House.
It did.
That's the key.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. It passed in the House, and this is how we got it passed in the House and sent over to the Senate. John had voiced his opposition to initiative petition reform. Fine. For some reason, because before he had voted for it. He had voted for it in his career, so now there was an opposition to it. And we can talk about that forever because there's lots of opposition on both sides. So much money is spent for IPs and against IPs. And there are very powerful special interests that definitely want to subvert the legislature and get things like sports betting and other things. I don't care how you feel about sports betting. It should be a law, not a constitutional amendment. It should be in a statute. But Republicans are so wishy-washy, guys. They don't want to vote on stuff like sports betting because they're like, I don't want to vote on that. And so instead, they just allow the Constitution to be manipulated, okay? So here's how it failed. We were able to, other Republicans, not just me, other groups went to John and said, we want you to bring up IP reform because remember, it had to pass in the House and be sent over to the Senate in time for passage. And we didn't know, we wanted to, I had to get it in writing, and we did. In exchange for voting for a bill that John really wanted, which was Senate Bill 727. It was a school choice bill, very bloated, horrible government bill. And he wanted that really bad. He had to have 82 votes. So he said, okay, initiative petition is the #1 priority. This is what the people want. So if you bring it up by the end of next week, we will make sure we will go in and vote for the bill, right? That's the deal that was made. He put it in writing, and sure enough, he took all of that entire next week to the very last hour by Friday, but he brought it up, we voted for it, initiative petition passed. He voted against it, but again, it passed, and it went to the Senate. The Senate, Freedom Caucus members started filibustering to compel their leadership to bring it up for passage. And leadership made a deal. They gave the bill to Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman. Right, you know the story. And they said, if you stop filibustering, on the last day of session, we'll bring it up for a vote. And will finally pass initiative petition reform. And they actually had a form with signatures on it from the senator. It's called the previous question form, right? Which is this a motion that stops debate, shuts everything down, and brings up that bill for vote. They said, okay, so the Freedom Caucus stopped filibustering, sat down, stopped filibustering, and that form was held by Senator Ben Brown. And that, fast forward to the end of session now, Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman says, I am the handler of the bill, because she had been given that bill by leadership on purpose. She takes the bill, the form with signatures on it, and she goes to the floor to make the motion for the PQ to bring up initiative petition, finally to get it passed in Missouri. And instead of making the motion for the PQ, what did she do?
She made an
She
amendment.
just got rid of the form. She made a motion to go to conference on the last day of session.
Where it couldn't have gone
Where
to
it can't
conference.
go to conference because there's no time. The session's over. It killed the bill.
Yeah.
And then we get Amendment 3. That's what happened.
Yeah, that's what happened.
That is exactly how it happened. So, you make these deals with leadership only for them to just go back on the deal. So, forgive me for really wanting to make sure that we get guarantees before we make any type of exchange.
And who is the biggest funder for Mary Elizabeth Coleman and also the biggest backer of SB 727?
Why, thank you for that question.
I can answer it.
Yes.
It's Rex Singfield.
Rex
You have the
Singfield.
same person making deals to get 727 passed, knowing that he was going to kill IP. You didn't know that yet.
Rex is a big
Isn't her PAC
supporter.
in DC? Her PAC is in DC, isn't it? Coleman's?
No, she has one here with under Frank Keller.
Okay, she has one in DC as well.
Yeah.
She has other aspirations, I think.
There's a lot of money going around. It has nothing to do with saving babies or children dedication.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to look up MEC reports, figure it out, because that's the key.
Yeah, NBC reports are great because you can see
Public record.
who is supporting who, what money is going. But I just want you all to know, for me, I've been accused that this is all about me. This is not how you make a political career. This is how you kill a political career. And I'm all for killing political careers, including my own. But I really feel convicted in my soul that this fight needed to happen.
This is a God thing.
That this conversation needed to happen, that we need to have, especially because of Amendment 3. But right now it's Amendment 3. Now, then it'll be our Second Amendment, and then
Yes.
on and on and
Yes.
on and on, our God-given rights are eroded. So this had to happen, and I think that it's making headway. I think we are making progress, clearly. John's priorities are now my priorities, which are very interesting. We just have to trust but verify. Yes, sir.
The last part of my question was, what can the citizenry do to help what you're trying to do, aside from having these meetings?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we can do?
I mean, meetings are great, but it's all about having your respectful conversations with your representatives, in which, this is what I tell people, lift them up, support them, tell them you will be behind them, tell them I want you to listen to your people first. You serve God and you serve your people, you don't serve your party. The Republican Party is just the infrastructure, guys, that we use to do and accomplish the priorities and policies that we want for our state. That's all it is. It's just like the framework of the house. The family is us. It's the people. And so you want your representatives to listen to you and tell them, listen to us. We're going to be behind you. If they try to target you, we won't let them. And they can't target all of us, right? And so it's about giving them a little bit of intestinal fortitude, not with the hammer over the back of the head, but lifting them up and saying, we've got your back.
But if they don't, is there a plan to primary these suckers in 2 years?
That's completely on you.
Yeah.
I would just say what they really need
We
is
need a
support.
pack,
They
a primary
they
pack.
really need you to strengthen their arms. Yes.
Is it?
Okay.
It needs to be a bit challenging.
I'm thinking because this was already discussed so early in the game that Patterson, had the speakership or whatever. I think a lot may have happened behind doors where these people, he probably asked them for their support
Yeah.
in voting for him.
Yeah.
And do you think that's pretty fair assessment?
100%.
Okay, well, so now he went to them for a promise for their vote. So now they're stuck between, do you know, if I don't vote for him, I'm going back on my word.
My word, yes.
How is that gonna look? And I think what needs the discussion when you're talking to your representatives is, look, Chance, did you make a promise to Patterson? That should be your first question to your representative. And don't beat him with the hammer and say, I get it, you're stuck with between a rock and a hard place.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is you did not have all the information when you made that promise.
Things have changed.
That's right.
The game has changed.
You
We
are
have
right.
another person that put their hat in the ring.
Yeah.
And so, who are you going? You based your word off of incomplete information.
Yep.
And what they need to do is go, if they want to go with you instead, is go to Patterson and say, hey, look, when you asked me to, vote for you, that you were it. You're the only game.
Yeah.
But now there's somebody else in the game that I think would be a better representation, and getting things done.
Yeah.
Or however they want to word it. It's
Sure.
their words, their relationship.
Sure.
And I think that's the conversation that people need to have with their representatives is, did you make this promise? And make them understand that, well, that promise was made under the illusion he was the only choice.
Right.
And we've all went back on promises and stuff like that when we're given new information. Oh, wait, no, wait. I'm going to have to go back on that because I didn't have all the information when
That's right.
made that promise.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And a lot of them do, they kind of, because remember, their heart's in the right place, so they're like, well, I told him I would vote for him.
Exactly.
I know you did. But number one, I wasn't even in that conversation, you know what I mean? I wasn't even an option at the point.
Right.
At that point. Plus, look at all the things that you now know, and so many of them just don't want to face it. Like when I tell them the story that I told you, they're just like, ugh. You know what I mean? You're like, yeah, this really happened, guys. It really did. So what are we going to do about it? The very first thing we have to do is say, no more. This is the line in the sand. No more. We don't support leadership anymore that doesn't reflect our values and the Republican Party platform. That's it. Yes.
Have you been able to reach out to all the newbies coming in and introduce yourself and tell them why you're doing this?
Yes.
And is there anybody we need to work on a little harder that doesn't understand where, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of the representatives need your support and your calls and your attentions and your emails. And I'm still reaching out to multiple representatives. I will keep reaching out. I will keep calling. That's one of their other things is, well, he hasn't called me. He hasn't got a hold of me. It's like, I have called, but I will continue to call. And by the way, they know my phone number too. If you have questions, I'm very accessible. And I'll answer any questions you have.
Are you going to go into Justin Smith's district in the 8th in like Ava and Douglas and over on the...
If they ask me to come, I'll come. If I can...
I'm asking you to go over there.
Sure. I appreciate it. I've tried to make myself... I have 3 jobs and 6 kids. My beautiful, amazing wife, who I don't deserve, with one on the way. But we have committed ourselves to this. So we travel everywhere, go everywhere. She's with the kids right now, having a fun day. I'm also having a fun day. This is also fun. But she kind of gets the day off today.
What about setting up the meeting with your rep and
Or
I'm
at
gonna
least
have
a
to do that
phone
with mine.
conversation, yeah.
Absolutely, sure.
A
Our
phone
new
conversation
grade
with
one.
someone who's influential in that
Yeah.
district.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's a bad deal.
because I think you don't want to go into people's district.
First of all, we appreciate your service with law enforcement
Thank you.
as a representative and your voting records.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that. You know, it goes in politics. There's lots of things thrown out there that have no basis whatsoever. One of the things that lately is that if we're supporting you, somehow we're ushering in ranked choice voting. Any thoughts on that?
Well, we banned ranked choice voting with Amendment 7. So that's in our Constitution, and without another constitutional amendment that would allow ranked choice voting, that's not going to happen. Ranked choice voting is now banned in our Constitution. That's a good thing. It was the only constitutional amendment I voted for, so I have no idea what they're talking with that. Most of this is fear-mongering, right?
Yes.
Because they don't want to decentralize the rules. They are desperately afraid of that, because that's how we lower the income tax. That's how we go to zero income tax in the state. That's how we get rid of the personal property tax. That's how we do everything good that we could do it in a week.
Yeah.
The Republicans control everything. Gold and silver, day 2. You know what I mean? Like something we've been trying to do for years.
You're just naming what
Right?
we tried to
For heaven's
pass in the
sakes.
platform,
Yes,
you know?
this
Basically.
is simple stuff.
Yeah.
And the narrative that you hear is, darn it, well, the House passed it, but the darn Senate didn't. And then the Republicans in the Senate say, darn it, it was just those darn Democrats. They wouldn't stop filibustering. The whole time, talking out of the side of their mouth. They've got all of the procedural power to just shut it down, vote. And they do. Now, the Senate doesn't use the PQ nearly as often as the House. We use it like 50 times in an hour. But for the Senate, they use it typically maybe twice a year, once before spring break, maybe once after, to shut down debate. And why do they do that? For the bills that they really, really want. And those bills should be the priority bills that the people of Missouri have identified. That's the disconnect here, guys. We're closing that disconnect between the people and the actual Republican leadership that doesn't listen to the people. And maybe they will now. Yes?
In regards to that, I got kind of an interesting thought and question. The HRCC, let's go back to the 90s. Now, I remember it back in the 90s. I'm old enough. And the HRCC was more like a frat club back then because the Republicans did not have power. They didn't. Until 2002, going into 2003, we see an evolution of the HRCC from frat club to Cosa Nostra mafia-style tactics, controlling legislation, legislators, and totally controlling leadership. And that is a nexus because that's the Republican Party, campaign committee, but it also brings in a lot of other people into the fold. Big money, big PACs,
Yes.
where all the money meets the power for the Republican Party in the state of Missouri.
Yes.
So, we've recognized that as
Yes.
a very serious problem in the state. So, you running for speaker is kind of like the people of Missouri against the HRCC and their nexus
Right.
of power to totally take over the Republican Party and turn it into a corporatist rhino nightmare. Okay, that's more statement. Question. Is it appropriate for people like us who are not elected officials to actually start talking to our elected officials about the pressure the HRCC is putting them under for votes when they're not listening to us?
It's funny, yes. That question, the answer, the easy answer is yes. Because transparency always is the best disinfectant for corruption.
Would you agree then?
100%.
With my statement that the HRCC is in fact affecting legislation,
Yes.
legislators, and votes.
100%. Yeah, of course. The HRCC is so powerful now because of the money that gets funneled through the representatives to the HRCC, and then they spend the money in campaign races to the winners and losers of their choice. Meaning they choose the consultants that my money, that my constituents gave me, is going to. They choose. For example, when I came in, the head of HRCC was also a partner in Palm Strategic. His name was John Radliff. Okay? Palm Strategic is a consulting firm. So he was funneling money from the representatives to HRCC to his partner in his own do you understand? That's called a conflict of interest.
Kind of.
Kind of. Tiny little conflict of interest right there. And to how effective. So what we tried to do was we went to John and members said, hey, we need a new director of HRCC. And so Representative Gregg headed up a committee to select a new head of HRCC. And we chose one unanimously. And then that person wasn't hired. Do you see how this works? We go through all the trouble of a lot of work with, and Jamie worked like heck on that committee to select a new person, and it didn't select him. John was like, no, well, it's not going to work out. We're going to go with this person. We're going to go with Hannah Beers Sutton, who worked for Axiom. Axiom is a nationwide, gigantic, consulting firm, which President Trump has told everyone not to work with. Just putting it out there. Just putting it out there. He's not a fan. And I think that those relationships with Axiom was supporting other people in the primary against President Trump. But anyway, long story short, yes, I saw you. And what's your question? Sorry.
All right. So there has been this narrative from the reps well, the repercussions of voting for you is going to be detrimental. They're going to be chastised. So my question is, why can't you just kind of throw a challenge out there? Okay, if you are as fair, if Patterson is as fair as everybody is claiming he is, then why the bully tactics? Why not just say, okay, if let it come to a vote, you promise that you will not, there will be no punishment on our reps for this, and see how the vote lies, how it falls.
Sadly, that's how it should be. That is not how it will be, because what those reps are trying to tell you that all these good things about John Patterson, but inside their heart they don't believe him. You see what I mean? They know that if they go against the grain, that they're going to be targeted. Of course they are, and that's probably true. But also, there's some things that they want. Those representatives want to be chairman of committee. They want to get on good committees, you know what I mean? They want the power. They want to have those positions. And by the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing. No. Not at all. Because if you're a chairman or you're on a good committee, then you can do more good. You can control more legislation. You can help your constituents out better. That's a good thing. You should want to do that. But the problem is when all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want to do this, but if I do, then I'm going to have to give up this. And that is a real... I'm just trying to get that across to you guys because that is a real tension in their heart.
And is it, I'm sorry for another question now, but is it possible then for you to say, okay, those that are lined up for chair seats can keep those seats, we all know they paid for them, but at least they can keep the seats, and then the next turn around, next session, we look at something different.
For example, my colleagues have gotten upset with me because they say, you are basically throwing us the baby out with the bathwater, and you're painting a big wide brush that we're all corrupt. And I've said, no, if you've listened to what I've said, I have not said that. Maybe other people have said that, but I have specifically not said that, because not everybody that gives to HRCC is corrupt. Not everybody is giving money in exchange for chairmanships, but it does happen. Not everybody, but it does happen. 2 representatives called me in the last few weeks, had the exact same conversation with John Patterson because both were supporting me. And John called them up and said, I've heard that you want to be the chairman of a committee. They said, yes, I do. And the very next thing he said was, how much money have you given? Now, that exchange, that explicit exchange of money for power, because being a chairman is powerful because you control legislation, which is actual laws that affect real people. Just so we remember that. That explicit exchange of money for power, that is the corrupting influence of the road that we're headed down. It doesn't happen with everybody. It doesn't happen with all chairmen, but it does happen. And significantly, that exchange of money is what you have to do in order to become the floor leader and the speaker. Because if you look at the MEC reports, it's the ones that give the most amount of money become the floor leader and then the speaker of the House. And HRCC will make sure that they know who is going to give the most, because they make sure that person gets the most. You see how it works? That way the HRCC has the power of who they get to choose that will become the floor leader and the speaker. That's how it is. And I'm trying to upset that balance, obviously. And to your point about chairman, like if you've already been promised a chairmanship, I considered that. I really did. And here's why I'm not going to do it. The only way to disinfect that whole system is to allow the committee people themselves to elect their own chairman.
Yes.
That way, chairmanships can't be given in exchange for money, right?
Yeah.
Or even let that even be a factor. Let's say let's say that's only one of the factors.
You would think
how much money have you given, right? Take that out of the equation completely and say, let the committee people themselves vote for who they think will be the best chairman or chairwoman.
Like we used to in school when we played Red Rover. I want that person. Hello.
Yeah, you always want the biggest guy that's going to get through. So that is my solution as a rules change to clean up that process and to remove that. And it also, what does it do? It removes the influence of the speaker on those chairmanships. So it takes more power away from the speaker. They don't want that.
I don't want it.
But we have to take the power away from the speaker and the floor leader. We have to. And send it back to the members of themselves. Yes.
So one of the things we keep getting is that, Patterson is really conservative. It's just, if he voted as conservative as he really is, he wouldn't be able to get elected in this district.
No.
That's the big story.
He's not,
Well, I know.
Wouldn't that be
My thing is, do you want somebody that's the Speaker of the House that can't step up and defend the platform?
Right.
Because he's worried about, because he represents one of, 8 more liberal districts?
Right. And so, what a great point. He said, look, it's one thing for John Patterson to have a difference of opinion and not vote as conservative as me. It's a whole other thing for him to control all the legislation in the House.
Yep.
If you're going to be the leadership, the most powerful leadership in the House, you can't be voting like that. Like, I get it. Let's say he's just voting that way because he's wanting to get elected. I disagree with that. I do. I think that you should vote and be authentic no matter who you are. You're in a purple district, go out and tell the people why you're voting the way they are. Don't try to tailor your vote. You know what I mean? Like, it just seems to me, people respect authenticity. I can prove this. Andrew Koenig was one of the most, if not the most, by voting record, conservative member of the Senate. And he was in a purple district. He was in a purple district in St. Louis County. But people believed he was authentic and truthful, and they kept voting for him. They kept supporting him, both as a House member and as a Senate member. I personally think that we should all be truthful and authentic to who we are and do the very best we can to represent the constituents. Now, if that person is going to be moderate and vote that way, then that person should probably not be the person that runs the entire House, because he's not going to be able to reflect our values. The majority of the values of the voters and the representatives in the Missouri House are not purple. They're red, right? They're conservative. And that should be our leader. Our leader should respect and reflect that. Any other questions? Yes, one more.
Okay, so my question is thinking a little more strategic on this, beyond the immediate fight. If your bid for House Chair fails, what's the strategic plan to fight off Amendment 3 and get IP reform done?
Great question. Our attempt to fight Amendment 3 is going to be a constitutional amendment. And it will be a House joint resolution that will go back to the voters in 2 years. I've been assured that that's going to be the number one priority, not just because I'm running to be the Speaker of the House, but because the vast majority of the Republican caucus has said openly that we will not allow John Patterson not to do this. So that bill, that House joint resolution of going back to the voters to dismantle Amendment 3 is going to go on the ballot, that it'll go to the Senate as well. IP reform is his number 2 priority, that he has said. He has voted against it twice. It failed again in the Senate. That's obviously it's one of my priorities too. And some members, you'll hear them say this, don't let them get away with this. We can't pass IP reform before we do Amendment 3 because then our fix to Amendment 3 might not pass. Not true. Concurrent majority, 5 of 8 congressional districts shows what? That Amendment 3 would have failed and our fix to Amendment 3 will pass easily. Yes. Go ahead. Oh, follow up, yeah.
So following on with that, we can get it to the House. Okay, so what's the attack to get it through the Senate? And I know that, your House member, you don't have all that control, but there's got to be some pressure, both from we the people and from the legislatures, our representatives, to force it through the Senate. There's got to be some pressure.
So we do have the pressure, and we're going to do a repeat of what we did last year. Now, Senate leadership has said that they are going to champion the fix to Amendment 3. Now, we saw what they did with IP reform last year. So just forgive me if we don't exactly take them at their word. Okay, we're going to do trust but verify. And so what my colleagues in the Senate are going to do is obviously have their Senate joint resolution ready to go. It will be some combination of the Senate's version and our version in the House. And if they won't bring it up, they will do exactly what they did last year. I anticipate a massive filibuster to require the previous question to get it through.
Okay.
I'm not speaking for them, though. I'm not in the Senate, but I would assume that that's
kind of wonder what's going on on the daily basis. Let me just finish one more question. Okay. Since Amendment 3 passed, I'm going to assume that under normal circumstances, there's got to be some legislation to put it in place.
No, okay, great question. So what ends up happening is all of the legislation and the current restrictions on abortion are going to be challenged in court, and they all have to be challenged in court because they're in conflict now with a new constitutional amendment. That's why we have a brief moment in time. It will be in the courts probably for the next 1 to 2 years.
And that's what I'm asking. Is it going to be blocked, slow rolled, whatever terminology you want to use, so that it doesn't immediately take effect?
Definitely, that's our strategy,
And we
is
can
slow it down. Yes, of course.
So that we're not murdering the unborn.
That's exactly right, so that people actually don't die, right. We're trying to slow it down as much as we possibly can, and it is going through the courts.
And is there a path to that?
100%, yeah.
Because I know the AG just filed.
Yes, of course, yeah. Everybody's on the same page that we're going to try to do it. It's just one of those things that we don't want to forget how we got here,
Right.
right? For the future of our state. We need to remember how we got here to make sure it never happens again.
Okay, thank you very much.
So going back to,
I got you.
And thank you.
going back to your solution and what he just said, if you do fail the speakership, you did mention vacating the chair.
Correct.
How about if you get the representative to say, okay, Patterson said these are going to be priorities. If they are not priorities, we will vote to vacate the chair.
That's right.
How about that?
Yeah, that's exactly
Has
what.
that been talked about?
Yes,
Has that been
many of
proposed?
my colleagues, that's exactly what they've asked me to do. Yes.
And is it being done?
It's a possibility, meaning if we can, to actually have the possibility to vacate the speaker, we just have to come up with what that date is, right? What does the bill actually, what the priorities are, what are the conditions, what are the concessions, and what is he going to do by this certain date? Hard and fast. We can't just say, we're going to do something on Amendment 3, or we're going to do something on this, because that's what they always say. And that something starts to look a lot like nothing, right?
We're tired of waiting until the last day.
I agree with you. I agree
All
with
the
you.
bills passed.
The House can't wait to the end. The House has to do it early. The Senate, this is how it always works because the nature of how big the Senate is and how big the House is and how small the Senate is. So, yes, to your point, that is being discussed. That is exactly the conversations that are being had, because we've got to have an ability to say, if he falls through, then what? Because it's just, this is the world we live in, that I'd love to trust you, but we've got to verify. Yes.
Can you also get commitment on any of the rules to change? Is the speaker elected before the rule vote or vice versa?
Yeah, so what ends up happening is the House falls underneath the old rules and pretty much adopts a temporary rules package, and then the actual rules are kind of debated for the next couple of weeks, and then it's passed as an actual bill. And that's when we are actually going to come up with amendments that we can offer, that we can actually change, substantive rules changes. And I think that that's probably the most realistic path that we have to actually changing the whole game. I know that there's going to be a lot of opposition from the establishment to change those rules. They really don't want to change those rules. But that's one of the conversations that I'm having right now is I've got to see substantive rules changes. What are we actually going to change?
I need to just give you my phone.
Sure.
So my representative, I just sent him, thank you for, I gave him some information. Are you watching this race? He said, thank you for the information. I am following. While Justin has made no attempt to reach out to me through my office, I'm vetting both individuals and who will be best suited to help me achieve my goals of the district, and I will cast my vote accordingly. Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your perspective. And I said, what's the best number to reach you at? And he says, he has the caucus list with my personal cell and office phone. If he were serious about his campaign for speaker, he would reach out at any time.
Who is that?
Matthew Overcast.
Overcast. Sure. Already called him, didn't call me back. I'll call him again.
Would you like to tell him that?
Tell him you'll be getting a call from him. You can take a text.
He won't give me his phone number, and
I'll
I'm
get
in
it.
his district.
This is being streamed live on Facebook. Get with me and you can send him a link.
Take a picture and just send it to him.
I'll call. He get the message. more
I
than
think
one
Justin
way.
is also trying not to be, I mean, I'm very, confrontational, but I think he's trying not to be adversarial.
Right.
And it will just give them another excuse
Right.
to say why they're not voting for him.
That no offense to Mr. Overcast or anybody else, that is a narrative and an excuse. That's all it is. You've seen my
It gets
videos.
better. We'll talk later.
He's seen, I've gone to the caucus. I actually went to them in person, told them this exact, everything, the whole story, the whole plan, rules changes, why we're doing what we're doing. So if you ask questions, I'll answer any questions, but yeah, I'll call.
Does what happened in caucus stay in caucus?
No.
Like, is that like a vibe? Okay,
No,
so
yeah, no. No.
did you, in winter caucus, did people not get called on, like you said earlier?
Correct.
Like that can happen?
Yeah.
So even in caucus, within their own people, and who would be the person that would be calling on people at that time?
Well, you have to remember, the Winter Caucus is not a Republican event. It's a House Republican Campaign Committee event. It's an HRCC event.
So who's
So
on
it's-
the dais? Who's the person?
John Patterson was at the top, was at the front of the dais talking about his priorities, and then Alex Riley was the person that was calling on people. And unfortunately, yeah, he called on a lot of people to support John, and he didn't call on people for me. I had one member just go up and grab the microphone to speak in support of me, which I appreciated. And then that was it. So he just called on a bunch of people to support John.
Yeah.
It's okay. I wanted to go to the caucus. It was obviously meant to be kind of an ambush. Okay, that's how politics works, by the way. But I wanted to go anyway because I wanted to let them hear my heart. I wanted to let them know this is what really happened with me and John. This is what we did. This is how Amendment 3 passed. This is all the nuts and bolts. And this is supposed to be our private caucus meeting where we can speak openly. But John was telling people not to speak. I said, I think that's dangerous. If Republicans can't speak without retribution or consequences, what are we? What are we? We're not America, right? You don't have the First Amendment. You can't speak your mind without fear of getting blowback? No. Yes.
I'm sorry, I had another question I was going to ask real quick. A number of counties, and I find out exactly how many have passed resolutions. Is that something that you feel is important to do?
Sure.
Or is it something that is not really going to be thought of by anybody?
It's probably the number one most important thing to me through this whole race, and I'll tell you why. I haven't asked counties to pass resolutions, but over a dozen have, representing about half the population of the state. And that's what means the most to me, because the people that work in your counties that are the Republican Central Committees, they don't get paid. It's a thankless job. They work really hard. And you know what I mean? Like, or if they do get paid, it's not much. It can't be as much as the big dollars I make, $36,000 a year.
Okay,
So-
some of them pay the county doesn't do anything.
Okay, all right. I stand corrected. Some get paid. I don't think it's much. But they do a job that's hard to do, and they represent the real people paying attention to legislation and policies in the state of Missouri. So when I get an endorsement from, like, John's own Central Committee endorsed me, right? My own Central Committee endorsed me, and tons of counties in between there. That means the most to me. It really does. Because at least I'm representing a voice and hopefully giving them a voice that they don't feel like they have right now.
Is there a day that we should show up with our white hats on and with a sign saying, we want Sparks?
Well, I've invited
January 8th.
Normal people out here, hear
Sure,
us.
sure. I've invited everybody to come to the Capitol on January 8th. There's a lot of people coming. There's some buses that are being chartered, and
Do you have some shirts or
so
hats?
I guess we'll have to have some shirts and hats. Maybe we'll have to
White
have some
hats.
made. White hats. Okay.
White hats.
All right. So
Justin.
yeah. I mean, ultimately, and people are like, "You're going to make it January 6th." I'm like, "You don't know anything about." I said, "No, there's no January 6th." By the way, it's on January 8th anyway. But, I said, "This is for people to come to their people's house. It's your house. It's called the People's House for a reason. So you can have your voice heard. It's your office. It's not their office. It's yours. And so have your voice heard, and hopefully a lot of representatives will listen to you."